Hello, everybody. When I say everybody, I know you may think that I'm just talking to a few people, but as I always say, potentially, it could be 7 billion people listening right now. And today, you could see, they say, ayin roiv ezun shamas, they say that there's always an eye that sees and an ear that hears. Today, it's literal, because when you broadcast something, it's forever in archive, and it can always be seen and always heard. So you got to be very careful, because there's a camera rolling all the time with sound, as you just proved. Anyway, hello everyone, both here and wherever you are in the world. That's why I don't say good evening anymore. I say good morning, good afternoon, because there's different time zones. And we are just here to speak about, is feminine energy superior? So let me begin first of all with dedication of the class, dedicated to a number of people. Number one, memory of Ari ben Brucha Sora. Yortzeit was last Shabbos, last weekend. Also memory of Beinish Getzel ben David Eliyahu. His Yortzeit is today, 22nd of Shvat. And in memory of Kalman Mordechai ben David Eliyahu, whose Yortzeit is tonight, the 23rd of Shvat. And Lahavdil ben Chaim L'Chaim. Yibodl ben Chaim L'Chaim. Also in honor of Ashley Rose Kirk. Yafer Rezel Bas Tova, whose third birthday is also tonight. May she be blessed in every way. So we dedicate a class to individuals, so the merit of our learning together, and whoever is going to benefit from this goes as direct merit and schus to the people that I just mentioned. And with that, let me tell you why I chose this topic. It's actually for a personal reason. It's personal, being that I grew up in the world of Chabad. I'm not bashful to say it. I wouldn't call it corporate Chabad, I'd call it more Hashkafas Chabad, which means a philosophy, a way of life, a thinking, a process. So today was the 27th Yortzeit of the last Chabad Rebbitzin. Her name was Rebbitzin Chaim Mushka, who was the wife for many years, for over 60 years, actually 60 years of the Rebbe. She was a daughter of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was in turn the son of a previous one, all the way back to the Balatanya. So I thought it appropriate to honor her, and actually honor all Jewish women and girls, and talk about the Ayidish Amamet. What is the role of the feminine? Also, it happens to be connected to the parshas and the chapters that we read in the Torah, where last week we read the classic chapter about Sinai, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, and as you may know, that before the Jews received the Torah at Sinai, God told Moses, that this is that he should first speak to the women and then he should speak to the men. And the question is asked, why? Why first to the women and then to the men, in preparing them to receive the mandate that was the Torah at Sinai over 3,300 years ago? So there are many reasons given for it. One of the reasons the Medrash says is because earlier in history, there was a time where God spoke, but he first spoke to the men instead of speaking first to the women. And that was in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, who was commanded and told not to eat from the tree of knowledge? Adam. And Adam told it to his wife. And there began all the problems. So the Medrash says something fascinating. Had God spoken straight to the woman, and the woman would have told the husband, we wouldn't have had all the problems that the Chet Tzaddah is the sin of the tree of knowledge. So the Medrash says, that's why when it came to Sinai, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, this time speak to the women first. Because I'm guaranteed that they'll be more guaranteed that they'll keep what I say than if you speak to the men first. So it's a pretty feminist medrash. It's a Shmeis Rabbah, you can look it up. It's not a new contemporary medrash. It goes back thousands of years. That is a tikkun essentially which of course begs the question, what's going on here? I mean, why did God then speak to Adam? He didn't know. He needed to have experience. Hashem pretty much can figure out that if there's an issue, but that's what the Medrash says. So I'll address that as well. It's one of the reasons I decided to speak about it as well, because it's connected to these parshas, as well as in general, as we read on now, and we read continuing chapters where it talks about the building of the Mishkan, next week's chapter, and there too the women participated. And of course, the big issue, the big question that everybody asks in contemporary times is, are women second-class citizens? Especially in the religious world, people, especially with all the news streaming out of Middle East, and you see the treatment of women there, So you hear the question, I hear it all the time from people that I know in the secular world, and they want to know how are women treated in the so-called Orthodox Jewish world. I mean, I don't like the word Orthodox, so strike that, but in the so-called traditional Jewish world. So all this is part of the topic on the table. And as I said, it's in honor of the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, who's the 27th yahrzeit. It was today, the 22nd of Shvat. So, as I said, then if you look at history, and this is all history, most of history is a testimony to male-dominated hierarchies. Men usually dominated, and as they do till this day. With all the modernity of our times, with all the so-called equal rights amendments and all kinds of legislation trying to make it, give women equal opportunities, it's still the fact of the matter is that a woman has the same education as a man, she will get usually a lower salary in the corporate world. And it is men that still control more or less the power. And this has been the case in history, throughout history, and maybe that may never change if left to people in power want to be in power. And of course, from a purely biological point of view, you see the fact is a man has the power to dominate over a woman. Physically, he's stronger. So men have subjugated women throughout history. And I'm talking now outside of the religious context, where men were the dominating factor, and women, whether they liked it or not, didn't have many rights. Actually, in most of the secular world, until the last 50 years, women had far less rights than they have today. The question, of course, is what does the Torah have to say about all this, which is what I will address. And it may surprise even people who come from Torah background what the Torah has to say, because it's not as simple as you may think it is. As I just said, that medrash that I just quoted, where God is literally telling Moshe to speak to Moses to speak to the women first, because the last time he spoke to the man first, there was problems, suggests something very interesting about who has a closer relationship to God and who will listen. If God had to choose a man or a woman, who is the one that God would choose? So, maybe scholars and rabbis would like to believe that they are more devout, but the Medrash also says, that one and others, that when push comes to shove, throughout Jewish history, it was the women that always showed more faith in times of challenge than the men. One of the reasons it says, B'schus nashim tzidkanios, in the merit of the Jewish women, the Jews were released from Egypt. Question is why? Where the men? Where the men? Moshe Rabbeinu was a man. So were so many tzaddikim, Amram and others. Why suddenly the merit of the Jewish women? What did they do the men didn't do? So among the reasons given is because when it came to the decree, and there was a challenge, it was the women that showed stronger faith. And the Medrash says that it's for women to have naturally more faith than a man has, which is also what I'm going to address here. What is the story regarding the women in Egypt? It says that when Pharaoh heard from his stargazers that a man will rise, a boy will grow up in Egypt, and he will become a challenge and redeem the Jewish people. So Pharaoh, in his wisdom, what he did was, he basically said, okay, let's kill all the Jewish boys. Kol haben, you throw them into the river Nile. Every boy, male boy, not girls, but men, the boys. With that, he wanted to preempt that this boy would never grow up to be a leader. That was his idea, which was, of course, a terrible decree. It meant every boy, Jewish child that would be born, boy, would be killed. So the men said to the women, till this decree is not abolished, let us not have children. We'll abstain from children. Pekuach nefesh. We won't have children. And the woman responded that if we don't have children, how will we ever leave this God-forsaken place? We'll die here. There won't be a next generation. And we were promised, they all knew the promise that Avraham Avinu was told, Abraham was told, that for 400 years you'll be in the Eretz Shalei Lachem, you'll be serving in a land that's not yours, and then V'achar ken yotzu b'rechush gadol. There was a promise, it was an explicit promise that everyone in Egypt knew. That didn't make it easier, but at least there was hope. They knew there would be a time when they would leave this place. So the woman said, what do you mean we're going to not have children? And of course the women prevailed, and they did have children, and boys were killed. We don't know the number, but there was clearly many. But the women found all kinds of tricks. Some went out to the field, the Gemara says, in Seita, where the whole story is told. Some went out in the fields and they found ways to when they were time to give birth. And of course, Yocheved, when Moshe was born, Moses was born, who was born after the decree. Aaron was born before the decree. But Moses was born after the decree. So she took him and put him in a little basket, waterproof, put him on the river Nile, and he was the one that mattered. The one that Pharaoh was trying to kill ended up being grown up in Pharaoh's home, ironically. So she prevailed. So Pharaoh, with all his stargazers, with all his attempts, didn't work anyway. But many died. So the Gemara says, because of this and the merit of the Jewish. So why were the Jewish women more in touch than the men were? That's the real question. And how does that affect us today? And how do we look at women in general? What is the role of women? And as you'll see, that you go to the raw, original Torah sources, especially as I'm going to discuss it, according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, that it's pretty counterintuitive to what most people think. Because remember, the tendency in history, again, I'll go back, is the people who are physically more powerful in this world usually dominate. That's how it is. And unfortunately, it's also seeped into the Jewish world. Let's not kid ourselves. A lot of it is about power. It's not necessarily about holiness. No, it's about power. And when there's power, powerful people will always try to be dominant. So I'm going to address all this and more. Now, an interesting thing, in the last few years, there have been studies. Now that we have more scientific ways of biologically and neurologically seeing the difference between male brain and female brains and so on, there have been studies done that are demonstrating something that was very surprising to the researchers. And that is that women are superior in many key areas. I wrote it in the email today just to share with you a few of the studies. I'll just read it straight from the quote here. There were a few books that came out to show you to the extent that this is going, that some are writing articles titled, "Our Fathers Necessary, the End of Men." You would never imagine that in a world was so dominated by men that you'd have a question that's being asked like that. And here's how one of the studies shows. It shows that a father contributes an infinitesimally small packet of DNA to the birth of a child, 1/millionth of the embryo's mass, 1/millionth, and the woman contributes everything else. Now there's a Gemara in Nida that talks about what a man contributes, what a woman contributes to the physical body, and of course God is the third partner, he contributes the soul. But that's what it says here. There are studies that show that everyone is born first female. At the moment of conception, the brain of the child is female until a little while later, that's when it changes. So in other words, the default state would be female, and so according to that, male is essentially a mutation. You know what a mutation is? How do you women like this so far? You can use it against anyone that says that you're second class. Okay. And then they go on to say that if all men on earth died tonight, the species would continue on frozen sperm. If the woman disappears, it's extinction of the human race. So you have your pretty strong stuff. I don't know if you know this, but I think that that autism is almost exclusively a male problem. 4 out of 5 autistic children are male, which is interesting as well. So there's this book called The Female Brain by a neuropsychiatrist that she writes the following. She writes that, I'm just reading because that's just pretty amazing what she says. I don't want to just say it on my own, that as I said, all brains are born are female, but around the 8th week, there's a certain surge of chemicals and testosterone, etc., that kills the cells in some regions, communications, and grows cells in aggression by a male. Okay, so next time if men have problem communicating, you can blame it on biology. That's what it says here. By the time they are 3 months old, girls on average are much better at picking up eye contact with other people and picking up information from faces. During play, girls look back at their mothers on average 10 to 20 times more than boys to check for emotional signals. I mean, these are studies. This is not theory. This has been proven. Girls can also, on average, hear a broader range of sounds in the human voice and can better discern changes in tone. And later, girls are much more likely to use sentences that begin with let us, while playing, let's do this or let's do that. They're more likely to take turns. As a result, girls are inclined to pursue certain goals, for example, to forge connection and to create community. In other words, to build a home. This is pure secular studies. It has nothing to do with any religious ideas. Now, if you look at this, you start wondering, so where did it come the impression that men seem to be the first-class citizens, and the women are the ones that have been always subjugated. You know. And of course, what does the Torah has to say about all this? I always found it interesting that why not just shut off the phone? Why do people have to run like it's an emergency? You know? But okay, I guess that's the story. So, I'm going to address all this and hopefully cover it in somewhat of a comprehensive way. Since I made a big promise, I got a lot of emails today, and people said they're going to be tuning in. And so I thank you again for making it possible. So whoever you are, the anonymous donor of some data is helping us here, okay? Good. So this, I guess, very intriguing stuff, pretty controversial. And but if you know a little the Torah's thinking, you'll see that all this is not surprising at all. When I read these studies, and I read them not now, I read them a few years ago, and then you pick up these things here and there, I was actually not surprised in the least. Because when you go back to the Medrash that I quoted before, and many others, you'll find that that historically, and also the Jewish way of looking at women and men, is very consistent with this. Who's called, for example, the Akeres Habayis? Exactly what she wrote. That women are more conducive to building a home, which means for building, making connections. What's a home? At the end of the day, a home is an environment where people get together and get along with each other. So the person who has more communication skills, the person who picks up on the, like they say, on voices, on faces, is the one that's fitting. And this is not due to conditioning. This is not due to education. This is natural biological hormones and chemicals. We're not getting now into what happens in the home and what parents impose, which I'm going to discuss in a few minutes, etc. So this is very consistent, because that's exactly what Judaism says, that the home is the center of life. That's what shapes the next generation. And the man is not called Iker Habayis, the woman is called Akeres Habayis, the foundation of the home. And that's not seen as a second-class thing at all, because until recently, until the last few hundred years, the concept of a career and work was actually not looked upon as a positive thing. I don't know if you know this, but in the times of the Greeks and then the Romans, work was seen something for servants. Labor, what we call today careers, was seen as not something for the elite. The elite were philosopher scientists, philosopher kings, they were thinkers, and they would hire people to do the work for them. The concept of a career, if you look at history, is just a really relatively new concept. And actually, in a way, upset the whole balance, because it was always known, especially in Torah and Judaism, that the center of life was not the synagogue, it was the home. As a matter of fact, the Jewish law dictates that when you come to a city, the first thing you're supposed to build, everyone guesses, is a synagogue. Because the first thing you need to have is a community center, right? A place where people should daven and learn and so on, pray. No, the first thing you're supposed to build is a mikveh, if in order of priority. Because a mikveh is what guarantees the sanctity of a home, taras mishpacha. It builds the shalom bayis and the right type of sanctity necessary to build a home. The home was always the center of life. And it was even in the non-Jewish world that way. The Jewish world, it was a sacred thing. It was a whole focus. Look at all holidays. Look at all Jewish customs. It's all around family and children. Everything. The Seder. Yes, you go to pray in the synagogue, the prayers, but where do you do the primary mitzvah? Purim, Passover. It's all in the home. And it's all around the children. Because that's the whole point. Because when God gave the Torah, last week's chapter, who did he ask for guarantors? He asked for guarantors. He wanted to have collateral. So what do you think the Jews did? First they offered the skenim, the scholar, the aged sages. Then they offered the avos, the patriarchs. They offered all kinds of great people. And all that was not acceptable until they said the children. That was their last option. You think the children are little kids. How could they be guarantors? Because the whole point of the Torah is to be perpetuated. And if there's no children and there's no future, it makes no difference how great of a scholar you are, it just dies. I've always pointed this out many times. It's a fascinating fact. You ask people in the world, they say, who was the greatest philosopher in history? So almost everybody will say Aristotle. Who's the greatest English writer? Shakespeare. The greatest artist? Rembrandt, Michelangelo, these greats. Greatest musicians. All great, no question, everyone agrees. They were great people. Then you ask one simple question. Where are their children and their grandchildren? And you have no clue. You don't even know if they had children. Not only don't their children perpetuate what they were teaching or what they did, you don't even know if they had children. Look now at Avram Avinu, Abraham. What is the greatest quality that he's attributed to? When God wants to destroy the city of Sodom, the wicked city, so there's a very interesting verse. It's one of the most striking verses when you think about it, because it's very personal. God says, he wants to conceal the fact from Abraham. He doesn't want to tell Abraham he's going to destroy the city, because he knew that Abraham is going to give him a hard time. So then he says, Hashem Omer, Avram, am I going to conceal this that I'm going to do from Abraham? A man, then why is God considering, why does God reconsider? Because God says, a man that the manash yitzava as bonov as beise achrav, las is doka mishpat. How could I conceal from a man that dedicated his whole life and dedicated his children and his home and his family, that they would forever follow my path of justice and charity? How can I conceal from a man like that my plans? Think about it. It's a pretty strong statement. In other words, a man that gave his life, it's not just he gave his life to serve me, gave his life dedicated to be charitable, that he would dedicate his family and his children. Why is that such a great thing? Because you'll see in history, great people don't necessarily have great children. As a matter of fact, there's a whole Talmudic discussion about that. That why the children of Talmidei Chacham and scholars are not necessarily scholars. For humility, for all the kinds of reasons the Talmud gives. The fact is, because a person who's very creative and very artistic and a genius sometimes feels he doesn't have time to diaper children. I have a big gift to give to the world. I'm God's gift to the universe. Why? How do I have time for children and family? That Abraham, who was a philosopher of the highest order, no question, a giant, and yet he understood, as great as he is, it's even greater to build a family that will follow my footsteps and follow this. That was the only one who achieved that in all of history is Abraham. All the names I mentioned, and you can mention 1,000 other names, the greatest emperors of Rome, the greatest, when I say great, I mean in power and in money and in all that, nobody left families. And nobody can show today that here's a family who can say, here's my yichus, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all the way straight to Abraham. This is what makes the Jewish people extremely unique, because it's not just we have ancestors that were great. We actually can trace the steps. Some people have shtayuk that can trace the steps all the way. Even those of us that can't, it's just a matter of finding a little few blocks. But basically we know how many generations there are from Abraham to Moses, from Moses to the next generation. It was all documented. And it's just a matter of tracing them. So this is an amazing fact, because it means that eternity is not built on how great you are. It's built on what you do with the next generation. And Judaism always knew that was the secret. That's why Vegadato levincha, kishalcha vincha, wherever you look in the Torah, it's again and again. The children, you tell the children, and you'll shenamta levanecha, you'll teach the children. Because without that, there's no future. Now, if you think about it in retrospect, it sounds so logical. Of course, it's a simple thing. Everything dies if you don't have children that continue your path. But nobody did it. Even today, it's still not. I mean, people are marvel at the fact that the Jewish nation was able to maintain that. So what's the center of Jewish life? It was always the home. It was always known to be the home. And that was not today the home you hear from people say, oh, you're a housekeeper. You're a mother of children. It's like some type of second class. It's like, like you're the woman in the kitchen bringing up children. That's how dismissive it is. If you really think about it, it's because this society has become worships materialism, so we see the thing that is eternal as being almost like meaningless. There was this guy who was giving his class to progressive women called feminists. And they were like, and they were like looking at him. He was a bearded guy, and they, the next thing they wanted to know was what his wife is doing. So they asked him. So he said, "Me and my wife, we run a home for unwanted children." And they started, "Wow, that's unbelievable. That's so beautiful." He says, "Yeah, it's our own children. Nobody else wants them." So they suddenly realized, they have 12 of their own children. Nobody else wants them. They're unwanted by the world. And they were quite embarrassed, because as soon as you say unwanted children, they thought it was children off the street, like homeless children. So it's a beautiful thing you're doing. But as soon as they say it's their own children, that's already, what's the matter with you? How many children? I remember this, it was a person, people came to this class, very, I could say well-to-do, to put it mildly. They were quite wealthy. And they were married, very nice couple. Both had jobs, very successful. Then one day they came to see me. This is years ago. They came to see me and they asked me, they wanted to consult something important to consult with. What are they consulting? They want to know if they should have a child. Okay, so I said, why not? Why shouldn't you have a child? So they said, I know it sounds funny, they said, because it's expensive. It's expensive to have a child. And the woman was an actuary, so she had all the calculations. So I said, how expensive is it? So she had the number. She says approximately $2.7 million will cost you from the moment of pregnancy till the child will be around 30 years old and they pay back the student loan. She had it all calculated like, I never heard that number quite before. And everything, you're counting diapers and education and aggravation and medication and everything, doctors. 2.7 million, okay. Now, trust me, 2.7 million was not very much money for them, even in one shot, let alone 30 years. But fine. So I didn't know how to answer. How do you answer people like this? It's a completely... So I said, something, let me think about it. But meanwhile, I'd like to invite you for a Shabbos to Crown Heights. So they said, okay, fine, let's schedule. I had a whole plan. My plan was, I know a family, relatives, who have 17 children. So I wanted to set them up to come Friday night to eat at that table, and without telling them anything, and they'll let them find out the shock when they come for Shabbos. Fine, the plan was made, everything is arranged Friday night. They arrive, they're all dressed up, they stay for Shabbos and everything. And they come Friday night, I'm there after davening, we all come sit down. A few children linger in, and then a few more. Starts accumulating. Not all the children, some were married already. 17 is usually someone's already out of the house, but nice, I think 14 were probably there. And they finally come to the table. It's a table full of children of all ages. And slowly the hosts who introduced them to start saying, yeah, this is Moshe, this is Yossi, this is this one, this is that, Dabba, this is, And who are they all? They're friends? No, they're our family. And for how many marriages? They thought they both remarried, and they both brought children from the previous. They say from one marriage, and they're no twins. And they said, how many children? I remember I was waiting for the moment they were the shock of their life. 17. I remember she almost fell off the chair. So I whispered to her. I said, "How much is 17 times 2.7 million? So she said, "Don't ask." And then they saw that they're very put together. The mother's a mechaneches. She's educated. She's not like one of these harried housewives. And they had the shock. Thank God today I could say they have their own 6 children. So it didn't need much explanation. They really realized that they have to just twist to something in the mind. What's most important? I said to them, these are people that don't have a penny to their name. I don't think they ever thought about 2.7 million. I don't think they thought about $2,700. That the love of children is the biggest gift you can have in life. When people know that, money is meaningless. I said, God forbid, when it comes to health, you're going to spend whatever money it takes, right? What do you need money if you don't have your health, if you don't have life? Anyway, as I said, they got their wake-up call, and that was that. So the fact is, we have to remember that we've been programmed and brainwashed by many attitudes today that create all kinds of distortions. And though I am ready to say, without question, that even the Jewish community suffers from many social problems too, but if you go to the strict Torah itself, untouched by, let's put it, by man's distortions and corruptions, you'll find the most progressive view on women and men, which I'm going to elaborate on. But we have to qualify to remember the following. All of us, every one of us has been conditioned. Today it's clear, very clear, many of our roles and our identities are not necessarily our true identities. That's what you picked up. Many girls, where do they learn attitudes in society? What their mothers teach them what's expected of you to do. So for good or for bad, that's how we're shaped. So we don't even know what it means to really be the quintessential perfect woman or the perfect man. Because so much of it is shaped by the men and the women in our lives that have affected how we see these things. So how do you know what is true and what's not true? That's why, thank God, we have a Torah, we have texts, and you can read them. And you can read them in their pure form and say, okay, what does the text say? And then you can say, okay, how does that compare to what I was taught, what I was told? When it comes to science, so basically to, let's go to the secular world, there's only one way, which is what's happening. That there are traditional women and male roles that have been expected from society for thousands of years, for good or for bad, mostly male-dominated hierarchies. And then studies begin to show that women have roles to play that in many ways are far superior to men. And hopefully this society can come to adjust to that. But let's be honest, we live in a society that is dominated by power, and let's call it especially sexual power. And people want their needs met. So they're going to fight whatever they want. And if a man has the power to control a woman and it serves his needs, of course he's going to do that. It's called kol da'alam gvar. Whoever's stronger wins. Stronger, I don't always mean physically stronger. It could be politically stronger, financially stronger. So men are, of course, invested in a world where they can control the finances, where they can dictate whether a woman and blackmail her in divorce or in other things. Of course, that's not the nature of any selfish, narcissistic society. What we have, when I say we, I mean the Jewish people, we have a Torah. And the Torah is meant to be a divine blueprint. It's not man-made. And since God created human beings, God could not create inferior human beings. The word inferiority and superiority, both ways, not men over women and women over men, are human terms. How could you talk about superiority in the context of a divine world? What's superior, your brain or your heart? Well, if you're missing one of them, you're probably going to be dead. So it doesn't really, what's superior? They both have their roles. As a matter of fact, today, one cell among 75 trillion cells can create more havoc than your largest organ. Think of a computer program. If you know any computer program, you could have millions of lines of code. And someone said to you, tell me, which line is the most important line in this code? You know something? You add a dot, you take out a dot, the whole code can go crazy. It has nothing to do with, there's no such thing in anything that's an indispensable type of system. Every piece is critical. You could say some pieces are life, like for example, God forbid, a person could be missing can have an accident, God forbid, and a certain organ could be missing, and it's not going to be cause death. Whereas if it's brain damage or it's a heart or other vital organs, but that still doesn't mean that everything is not necessary. Mozart, the great musician, when he presented his symphony to the Archduke of Austria, so the Archduke thought he was an expert, a connoisseur of music, said to Mozart, beautiful music, but far too many notes. That's what he decided, this expert, that too many notes. So Mozart purportedly responded, he said, yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary. Yeah. So there's many notes, but every one is necessary. Anyone who's this is a man-made structure. So what the Torah gives us a benefit is, it gives you the God's plan. Why did he create men and women in the first place? This science cannot really answer. Scientists struggle actually with the question. Some scientists even ask, why, if nature and evolution actually should have worked far more efficient to have one organism like an amoeba that just reproduces itself. It's a waste of a lot of energy to have male and female having to come together and courtships and all that, all the waste of time. If it was most efficient, you'd create a machine that's able to perpetuate itself. Why do you need two entities? This is a very significant scientific question. There's no answer for it yet. The Torah says immediately an answer, because the Torah in the beginning of the Chumash, as I'll soon describe, gives a whole story of how Adam and Eve and how they were created and why God separated them, and they're coming together and all that, which we'll soon address. So the point I'm making here is when you talk about feminine and masculine, it's far more complicated because we've been jaded and we've assumed all kinds of attitudes that we pick up from society, from our families, our homes, for good and for bad again. I'm not going to suggest it's all bad. Some of it is positive and some is not. So the goal really in addressing this and what makes it difficult is because we all have preconceived notions. Because everyone sitting right here, everyone on earth is either male or female. Nobody is objective. None of us can stand from the outside and say, let's review this in an objective way. We already have attitudes. And whether you know it or not, when you go to school, and the way things are expected, of what boys are expected from boys and what's expected from girls, shape. And to the point, as I said before, we can't even distinguish what is who I really am and who's what I became because people wanted me to be there, including parents and communities and so on. So as many feminists did make the point in the last generations, they said, we've been shaped for years by men who wanted to shape us in the way they wanted to fit into their plan. We're not ready, we're not accepting that. Now, some traditional circles said that's the rebellion of women against men. And truth is, there's always a blessing in disguise in everything. Because actually what they were challenging was pretty correct. Let's go back to the home analogy. If the home is the center of life, and women and men are both dedicated to that center, to bring up a healthy family, following, let's talk in the Jewish context, following Torah, mitzvahs, build up a strong, healthy home that will perpetuate spiritually healthy, psychologically healthy, committed, education, and so on. That's the center of life. But now, since we live in a world where you need to make a living, someone has to pay the bills, you have to buy challah for Shabbos, or you have to educate your children and pay a teacher, or other so-called expenses. So good. So who goes out to work? I'm talking like 500 years ago. So the man. Why? Because a man physically is stronger. In 1 hour of him carrying wood, he can carry more wood than a woman can in an hour. So it's a very practical arrangement. The woman's going to go out. It's going to take her 5 hours to earn what he can earn in an hour, just on a very basic level. Also, so God created that the man is technically more aggressive. He has more physical strength. So he does that job. The woman is wired to be a keres habayis, as I said, the foundation of the home. She has, as the studies show, a certain sensitivity, the patience, etc., etc. So it's a partnership, a perfect partnership. And when they both have a measure of humility, no one looks at the other down. We both have two roles. We're both serving God, and we serve God in two ways. It would be like saying, who was superior, the Levites and the Kohanim that worked in the temple, or Zvulun and the tribes that worked in the fields, or were business people? Yisachar, the scholars, or Zvulun? The answer is they both are necessary, and they're both equal partners. And they make a partnership, and when you have humility, and you're both dedicated to the same cause, it's like two partners in a business. We don't do the same job. You do that part, I do this part, and everything is great. So where did this contract get severed? Why didn't it work? Because suddenly the world became industrialized. And industry created, it's no more carrying wood. Now you don't have to work that hard. You could have machines that work in the field all day. And you could just sit there and press a button. And then mass production created a lot of free time. So now was the creation, if you look in the history, the creation of the career. So now we have a career. And a man goes to work. So it's no longer just he's doing menial labor, all in order to come home and bring home food for Shabbos or food for the family or the necessities. Now it becomes an end in itself. You know, the career is a pretty cool thing. I can make more money, buy more luxuries, etc. And then you have other guys in work, and you can have fun. You can go out for a drink afterwards. Why go home to nagging children and a harried wife? You have your own little life here. So suddenly a new center of life began. There was the home, and now there's the career, the workplace. You know, over time, women, meanwhile, are staying home to do what they have to do. The man is busy having two lives. I'm not even saying it's necessarily doing something inappropriate, but you right away have more than one center. So what do you think is going to happen after a few hundred years? The woman will suddenly wake up one day and say, 1 second, what's the deal? Where's the partnership? You're out there enjoying your life. I'm back home with the children doing the main thing, and you created your own. It was once upon a time you were just basically chopping wood or carrying water to build our home. Now you have your own life. So of course the women will say, hey, we also want to have fun. We also want a career. You're the ones that broke the contract. Why are you suddenly... the men say, no, that's not the deal. You're the ones that are supposed to be at home, and it's none of your business what we're doing, or whatever it is. I'm just giving you the seeds of how the feminist revolution began. So tell me, who's the one that really made the mistake? So people blame the women. What, the women suddenly chutzpah? They're suddenly rising? Yeah, but they're rising against men who broke the contract already. I mean, if you go over the big picture. The question is really, how do you get it back to the normal place? But now already the cat's out of the bag, so now we have a whole world. A world of materialism, a world of a lot of leisure, a lot of free time. And it's no longer the focus, the center is serving God and building a home, a mishkan, a temple for God. Now there's all kinds of other agendas going on. And we're all born into this world, and we have to try to figure it out. Just to show you how complicated it gets. You know, it sounded so simple when I began. But that's why it's not so simple, because everybody's got their own game they're playing. So what does the Torah say about all this? So let's go back to the Garden of Eden, because it's all there in those early verses, literally in Bereshis. And just maybe in 10 verses, the whole story of women and men are told. The story of love, the story of sin, the story of everything is there. And the story of male and masculine and feminine energy, which I'll soon elaborate some more upon. And that goes like this. So it says, this is exactly what it says in Chumash. It says, after 6 days, God created everything in the world, light on day one, and then he separated the heavens and the higher and the lower heavens. and then day 3 vegetation, and day 4 the luminaries, and day 5 the animals, and the fish in the sea. And then day 6 comes, and he says, Nasa Adam, this is how the Torah puts it, let us create human being, Adam. Now let's first make it very clear here. Adam does not mean man, it's human being. Because the next, what does it say in the same verse? Zachar nekeva bara esam. That this human being is male and female, created in the divine image. Now there are two opinions how this worked. Some say it would look mostly like a man and a woman was in there, but you couldn't really see it. And most say that it was, the verse literally is clearly an androgynous creature, male and female, like half male, half female. And then later it continues and says, and then God separated them. And then that's the story of why they searched for each other. Al Kain Yazav Adam, why will a human man go and search for a woman? And technically the same question, why will a woman respond to a man? Because they were both two halves of one whole. The concept, what we call a soulmate, is right there. Pla gufa is the expression in the Zohar, different expressions in the different places of the Talmud, that basically two halves of one whole that were separated by God, in order for them to go search each other and become one, they become one flesh again, and with that they have the power, to give birth to the next generation. That's what it says. Now what does this mean? What is the whole story here? Why did God do it this way? Why didn't he just create a man and a woman and that's it? He didn't create any other animal like that. All the other animals were created. Species were male and female. It doesn't say anywhere he took a behemoth or another animal and made male and female, split it. They were created as they were, male and female species. Why suddenly here by the human being it's a different way? So clearly it's hidden in the word Tselem Elokim, because the human being is different than all creatures, being that it is in divine image. Now, there's no way to understand these verses without some deeper interpretation. Because how do you explain it? I mean, Rashi has his explanations, that's the literal interpretation. There's Midrashim galore on this, hundreds of commentaries on this. But what's the basic meaning? What is going on here? I mean, like I said, the Klotz Kasha, why do it this way? Why create this whole two steps and they're one and then separate and then they come together, etc. So here you really, to really understand it, and the only place that I find that that makes sense in the verses themselves, and once you know it, you realize the power of it, is the Kabbalistic writings, first in the Zohar, and then the Kisvei Arizal, the Arizal, and Chassidus, Chabad especially, elaborates on this at length. And essentially it's coming to explain the biggest question of all. What does it mean, the divine image? We all know that that God doesn't have an image. As a matter of fact, it's one of the 10 Commandments, that you're not allowed to make any image in the image of God. So was God himself made an image of himself? Like some philosophers asked the question, that where did God basically defy his own law? He said, no, don't create anything in the divine image. He created a human being in the divine image. Tselem Elokim. Something we're not allowed to do. So what does it mean at Tselem Elokim? So this is really, in essence, I don't know if I don't know if you're all expert Kabbalists or not, but the essence of Kabbalah comes to answer this question. This is like the big question of what Kabbalah comes to answer. How we connect to God in a structured world when God is beyond structure. His thoughts are not our thoughts. The pasuk in Yecheskel says, Loi Adam hu v'loi Demusa Adam. So it's exactly opposite. Here he says he created B'Tselem Demus, Tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu. It says he's not Demus Adam. God is obviously beyond any definition and structure and parameters that we can identify with. There's actually a disagreement between the Rambam and the Maharal of Prague. The Rambam writes that God is one with his knowledge. Madahu, Amadahu, Yedeu, he's one. And the Maharal says, how could you attribute terms like knowledge to God? God is beyond knowledge. God is beyond structure. And therein lies the big dilemma. We know that God is beyond all of existence because God cannot be part of existence. And yet he created this existence and tells us to cleave to him. Valachta bedrachav, go in my ways. V'atem hadvekim, you shall bind yourself to me. V'yadaita, know God. Das alekei avicha, love God. How can we connect to something that's so infinitely different than us? God is not just finite and infinite, completely beyond anything we can even imagine. A creator and a creature. Can a creature understand a creator? Think of an ant trying to understand a human being, and that's both creatures. And here you're expecting a creature, a nivra, to relate to a boira. How is that possible? This has been the big dilemma that basically all of Torah really addresses, but Kabbalah specifically goes into this whole discussion, how do these two meet? And yet it says clearly in the Torah that even though God's beyond any image, He created a human being in the divine image. What does that mean? So the general answer is very simple. Well, I shouldn't say very simple. It's very simple once you hear the answer, but it's not simple to explain. The answer is that God chose to manifest a dimension of godliness in structure. So in other words, God is beyond any type of tselem or dmus. You can't take a picture or give you a description of the divine. But the divine, in His infinite capacity, I'm using now language from one of the great Kabbalists, whose name was Ibn Gabbai, and he wrote a sefer called Avodas HaKodesh, which means a holy sacred work. It's a great, one of the classic works of Kabbalah, precedes the Arizal. He writes the following. He says that Kishem shakadosh baruch hu yesh lekeiche bebilti b'gvul, kach yesh lekeiche b'gvul. Just like God can create the infinite, He can create the finite. And he continues, because if you say that He can only create the infinite and not the finite, that alone makes Him finite, that He cannot create the infinite, which limits His capacity. So you have to say that He's beyond infinite and beyond finite. Now, here it may not be the place to go into the whole long discussion about it, but it basically comes to a point where, yes, the divine essence is beyond finite and beyond infinite, and that's why you can't say that God is closer to the infinite than God is to the finite. So, basically, God chose to create a universe, and in this universe, think of the universe like God's art. God is the artist, and created a piece of art. Now, what does one piece of art can tell you about an artist? Not much. A piece of art can tell you that an artist must have the ability to create this art. But how many other pieces of art can this artist create? Who knows? Millions, infinite. And let's ask a further question. Is he only an artist? Can he do other things besides creating art? Absolutely, even the human beings. You may see a beautiful painting and say, okay, what do I know about the artist? You don't know, is he a father? Is he a husband? Is he a businessman? Maybe he has other skills. He may be a musician. He may have 1,000 other skills. You know he can create art. The question is, how much of the art reflects and tells you about the artist? And again, this is even in mortals themselves, in human beings. It tells you something. What the Torah tells us is that God says, I am revealing myself to you. Ata hareso ladas. I reveal myself to you because I am putting myself in the art that I created. That when you'll study it, you'll learn about me. So when we say, for example, mipsari echzel leka, from my flesh I behold God. Because the flesh is created in the image of God, and God says when you study human flesh, which means human being, and the system, you're studying me. Because I'm the one that shaped it. Why are there 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth? And why do we have 248 evarim, organs and limbs, and 365 gidim? Because I shaped it that way. There's a reason for it. So when you'll study the world, you'll learn about me. Did it have to be that way? No. God created a world where, think of it like a master and a servant. Not every servant understands his master. You can have it's an infinite distance. Your job is to do mitzvahs, and that's it. Who says you have to know God? Who says you have to relate to God? But the Kabbalists argue, no, you can't say that, because then there wouldn't be mitzvahs like know God, love God. Then it should only be mitzvahs maisis. Put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, eat kosher, light candles, make a Pesach Seder. Fine. A servant is doing work for the master. The melech, the king says, do this, you do this, you do that. Makes no difference whether you understand the king or not. But God didn't do that. He said, I want you to know me. I want you to have a relationship with me. Shutav lakadosh baruch hu b'ma'aseh b'reishis. I want you to be a partner with me in creation. A partner is not a servant. That's why we have Eim Kavadim and there's Eim Kabonim. We're not just compared to servants, we're also compared to children. A child is not just a servant of a master, a child has the genes of the master. So therefore, you come to understand, this is in the second chapter in Tanya, where he speaks about Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, in the same verses. God didn't just give life to a human being, He took Yapach ba'apav nishmas chayim, gave him a piece of himself. However you understand the philosophy of it, but it's what's called a chelik elaka mimal mamish. So therefore we are a piece of godliness. We're not God, there's only one God. Hu mekayme shalelam, ina elam mekayme. God is one with the art. That doesn't mean the art is one with the artist. So that's how Kabbalah explains it. To use language, Kabbalistic language, it says that the Eibishter manifested himself in the tzir of Adam Elyon, a supernal cosmic man, and that's the Tzelem Elokim. So when we say the human being was created in the divine image, going back to the verse, you're referring to how God manifested in a structure which is called the human image, which in turn reflects on the divine. Now, there's a state of the divine that's beyond all images, absolutely. But here's where comes the beauty of it is, and this is where it gets more complicated, how does the image of the divine image connect to the divine that's beyond an image? And that's really not completely the scope of this discussion. It's partially yes, and I'll soon get to it. This will explain why he created male and female. Because the male and female, and here I ask you to not think of a man and a woman, that you yourself or someone you know. We're talking about masculine energy and feminine energy. God is obviously not a he or a she, because God is not structured in any way like that. That's why you have the concept you see sometimes you refer to Elikus, the Eibishter, as masculine. That's usually HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the masculine manifestation. But then there's feminine language for the Eibishter, Shechina. So you say Kutchabrichu v'Shchinte. So in language of Kabbalah, that's Zoh and Malchus, the masculine and the feminine. And they're both forms of energy. Why did he create these two? Because in the root, masculine, what would become later man and woman, originates from two forms of energy. One is called masculine energy and one is called feminine energy. So now we have to understand what these two energies are. And again, I ask you, this is not about you and me as men and women. This is about energy called masculine energy and feminine energy. And these two energies are together make the divine image. That there's two forms of energy that manifest. So using now the language again of Kabbalah and Chassidus, the language is that there's two types of energy that emanate from the divine. Sometimes one is called Er HaMakif, Er Pnimi. Sometimes it's called Sevav Kalam and Mamala Kalam. In real Kabbalistic language, it's Igulim and Yesher, which means circles and lines. So you have two types of energy. One is a more, we'll call encompassing energy. We call it a transcendent energy. And another is called a permeating, an integrated energy. And both are necessary. And as you'll see, it's actually all mitzvahs are built around these two. For example, when you sit in a sukkah or when you put on a talis, they're both makivdik. They both surround you. But when you, let's say, eat something, you digest it. It's internal. So, for example, v'lakachtem lachem, when you take the daled minim, the 4 species sukkahs, that's called pnimius, because you're taking it to your heart. And the sukkah is called a makif. The talis is a makif, it's surrounding, and the tzitzis are internal. And you can go through all Yiddishkeit, and everywhere in Torah you'll find these two levels. What do they mean in simple English? Let's translate what these mean. Anything that is any form of creation. Let's go back to the artist. An artist has to have two real elements, two energies to create a piece of art. One is he needs to have a vision. A vision of what kind of art he wants to create, he or she. The second thing, he needs to have details. No piece of art is just a vision, it has to have details. Is it going to be a sunset? Is it going to be people? Is it going to be a field? Everything that art is. So you can't just have a general picture, you have to have also specifics. The same thing is in the human structure. There are energies, for example, the life force within us. Is there a difference between the life force that is in your small toe and the life force in your face? No, they're both alive. One person that's alive. But there's a difference in their functionality. For example, your brain, it functions as the mind. The eyes see, the ears hear. But if you say the neshama resides everywhere. Everything is alive. There's not one part of the human being that's a healthy human being that is not alive. So you have what's called a so-called all-encompassing energy, and then you have a specific one. As we'll soon see, this is somewhat associated to masculine and feminine. But there's another way to look at it also. In the Kabbalistic language, in Chassidic language, it talks about Eir Ein Sof. Eir Ein Sof is divine energy. And it says there are two types of divine energy that go, this is the root of what Makif and Pnimi is. And it goes like this. The two types of divine energy is one called an internal, intimate energy, and another is called an expressive energy. I'll use an example from us, because again, we're creating the divine image, so we can understand it from ourselves. There's the way you express yourself to others. Expressive energy. When you communicate with people, you're doing business with them, you're interacting with them. So that's expressive energy. You express yourself. And the intimate energy is how you are with yourself. In the language of Chassidus, it goes legalis es atzmei and legalis luzulase. One that reveals who you are, and one that's revealed to another. Now, liba lepuma legalia, there's an expression. A person cannot reveal the depths of their heart. The deepest feelings inside of you is almost impossible to communicate to someone else. But that doesn't mean it's not energy. It just means it's very intimate internal energy that's not expressible. And then there's energy that expresses itself. This in its root is masculine and feminine energy. And this is before the human being was created. These two energies, as they would evolve, would ultimately become Adam and Chava, the male, the Zachar and the Nekeva. But it's not rooted in what we would call biological root, it's rooted in spiritual differences. What's the spiritual difference between masculine energy and feminine energy? Masculine energy is expressive. Ish darke lichpesh. A man and masculine energy is meant to express itself. It's meant to go out and express. And feminine energy is kfuda bas melech prima, is internal. It's intimate. Its real power is inward, is going inward instead of going outward. Both are necessary. Both are divine expressions. They're both divine revelations, but they're both very different. They will evolve to what would become a woman and what would become a man. But at this stage that I'm describing, they're in their root, they're just two forms of energy. Now, it's important to note that they also overlap, because since they come from one source, there's what's called hiskalus. They overlap because they both are coming from one place. So there's the feminine within the masculine, and there's masculine within the feminine. So it's not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, even on earth, a woman and man are much more similar than they are different. There are key differences, but there's a lot of things that are similar. So the same thing in that energy, there are commonalities, but the key distinction is one is intimate and one is expressive. So as they evolve, they will become what's called Adam and Chava. That's why God created the human being, Zachar Nekeva Bareisa, because the Tselem Elokim, the reality is made up of two dimensions, one inward and one outer. That's the way God created existence. And that's masculine and feminine. In the higher levels, you won't call it male and female. You'll just call it the energy inward, the energy outward. On a lower level, you'll call it the makif and the pnimi, and so on and so forth. Later, it will evolve into what's called mashpia and makabel, like the sun and the moon. So which is more powerful, the sun or the moon? So initially, everyone says the sun is more powerful. More light, it's stronger, it has its own light. The moon only reflects the sun. Yeah, but you know something? We Jews, daimim and mainin levana, we're compared to, and we count by the moon. Why would we be given the moon to be compared to when it's a weaker and inferior luminary? Because it's not. The Gemara says, David hu hakotan, Yaakov hu hakotan, the Mor hakotan, the small luminary, which is the moon, has in some ways more power than the sun. Because the moon is not its own energy, it's intimate energy. And the sun is its own power, it's an expressive energy, is the sun, and the moon is an internal energy. And the internal energy, in many ways, is much more powerful than expressive energy. For example, you'll see two people who love each other, you'll see them staring at the moon, you'll never see them staring at the sun. The moon has its own romantic and its own power. And the moon is not just a mirror image of the sun. Like, you put a mirror in front of the sun, and you see a moon. A moon has its own power. When Moshe Rabbeinu was told that the Jews will leave Egypt, God did not show him the sun. He showed him the moon and said the moon is the secret of renewal and the secret of change, that even as the moon diminishes, it reborn. We sanctify the moon every month. The sun, we make a blessing every 29 years. But the moon is every month, because the moon has a power. In the language of Kabbalah, the moon is Malchus, David HaMelech. That's why we say David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayim by Kiddush when we sanctify the moon. And David is not the power of expressive energy, it's the power of humble energy. So there you go. You have two forms of energy that will at some point evolve into what's called Zachar Nekeva Bara Esam. And then they separate into two. Why they separate into two? Because God created the world in a way where he desired there should be what's called a home in this dira b'tachtenim, a home in this lower world. And the whole point of the world is that there should be separate world that should appear separate to us. And our job is liyachid, is to reunite it with the divine. So where is that going to be expressed most? In these two energies. These two energies at some point will split. It's called in Kabbalah the Nesira, a split. Rosh Hashanah is when that split happens. That's when all this happened, the sixth day of creation. And then it's our job, that's now our avodah, our work is to reconnect them. So it's to reconnect these two energies. So let's speak in very simple terms. I don't know, I hope I didn't lose you in this last 15 minutes. Well, it's all recorded, you could hear it again. And it is complicated stuff, but I'm just trying to sum it up. So here's a simple example. You ask people, who are you? Most people give you their business card, right? But what your business card is what you do, not who you are. That's your expressive energy, not who you are. It's not your intimate energy. As a matter of fact, most of us don't even know who we are. And even if we knew a little, how much can you say about it? So here we have the split. We're busy in a world doing 1,000 things. Ask yourself, what did you do today? What was most of your involvement? Where's your passion? Most people's passion is in their work, is in making money, is in the battles they fight. Everything, kibush. It's all in the conquering. You're conquering something. Maybe not conquering territory. You're conquering market share. You're conquering a client. We're busy conquering. And someone says, what about you? Where's your soul? My soul. Some people say, oh, my soul, forget about it. I cry about it every day. My soul is lost, or my soul is buried somewhere. The Meraglim, why did the Meraglim not want to, the scouts didn't want to go into Israel? Because they said, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. As soon as they go into the marketplace, forget about it. I'll lose myself. So most of us are lost in this world, let's be honest. We may have some anchors here and there, family, and maybe our commitments, our mitzvahs, and so on. Halavai. But most of us are lost in this world. We are in a world that is completely controlled by aggressive energy. Intimate energy is not respected in this world. Someone will say, oh, this person is a very beautiful soul. They say, yeah, I don't know how much money I can make with that, exactly. As a matter of fact, that's a perfect person to take advantage of. The real sharks. Or you'll say, I'll respect, I'll leave the person alone, fine, he's naive. He lives in La La Land, This world, what does it respect? It respects power, respects control, respects money, respects everything that's all about outer expression. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. If it's used for good things, so be it. But it does not respect, and value pnimizdika beauty, let's be honest. Externals. Internal things are not valued in this world. That's what happened by the Chet Tzadas. So Adam and Chava are put into Gan Eden, and they're told, you're two energies, you both are partners, each of you have to contribute something. And it's a Gemara Nechulin that says that a man goes out, chitim kaisis, he goes out in the field, works hard at gathering the wheat. Do you eat wheat? No. You give it to the woman, the wife, she takes the wheat and turns it into flour and makes bread. That's what you eat. And then goes pishtin levish. You gather flax, you gather material. You wear pishtin? No, you don't wear it. You give it to the tailor, you give it to the wife, and she turns it into a garment. That's the partnership. Use your darke lichbesh, your conquering, to conquer the world and sublimate the elements and turn it into kedusha, into home. But who's going to turn it into the holiness? That the woman will do, because she has the kfuda bas melech pnima, the inner, intimate, gentle energy that can take. Who works hard in the field? Let the man work his aggressive energy. Think of Shabbos. So even though according to Jewish law, a woman can make kiddush and a man can light candles, but the traditional role is the man makes kiddush and the woman lights the candles. Do you ever think why? Why not the other way around? I mean, I know it's a custom, we just do it, but there's a reason. Because yayin, wine, kiddush yayin, is a symbol of aggression. And since a man is aggressive energy, it's mekadosh, sanctify your aggression. What is the symbol of light? Light is intimate power. It's not strong, it's not powerful, but ma'at a little light dispels darkness. Light is perfect feminine energy. That's why sometimes it says not but oira. Not just oir. Because light is the classic feminine energy. And a wick, the psila, is masculine energy. To take the physical world and turn it into a wick that now you can light a fire with. So he brings he takes the raw elements of the world, turns it into something that a woman can then turn it into a utility for human beings. Now, I'm not suggesting that women exclusively do this and men exclusively do that. We have to have both. We have things that we are called, that we battle with the elements of the world, and then we have to turn it into something holy. So there's two stages. Like, for example, what the holiest things are what? Torah, mezuzahs, and tefillin. Stop, right? How are they made? They're made exactly like that. You take raw hide from an animal. It doesn't get more materialistic than that. And you have to tan the leather, ibud eiris. You have to work it hard and turn it into a cloth, how do you translate cloth? Parchment. And on parchment, now you write Oisius, the holy words, in a holy way, and you've taken real material world and you turned it into a holy object. This is essentially the goal. God created a world of aggressive world, that you need aggressive power to turn that into something that is sacred. The Mishkan that we read about next week, you're going to take 15 items, gold, silver, copper. It's not a spiritual experience. You're taking the material world and you're turning it into a spiritual environment. To do that, you need masculine energy to weaken the hold of the physical, to battle with it, the warrior, and you need feminine energy to turn it into kedusha, holiness. And because there's overlap, both have both. So when you think of it that way, you'll see all the roles that the Torah talks about, what a woman's main focus is and what a man's main focus is, all about this. Why is a woman absolved, for example, from the mitzvahs that are time-related? So, the technical reason is because she's busy with the family and children. She can't keep her bound to a time-related mitzvah, because if the family needs her, she has to go put on tefillin or do something like that. That's the technical reason. But that's a reason down on earth. What's the root of the reason? God could have created the whole thing in a different way. Is because it says in Arizal writes, because that a woman is time. Her whole body is time. She's like the moon. Her whole biology is time. So she doesn't have to sanctify time. Her being is time itself. A man is outside of time, so he has to go sanctify time. That Arizal says this. Anyway, there's more to say about this. I'm just giving a few, this is more briefly stated. I want to go back to the initial point here. So at the end of the day, what is superior to which? And as I said earlier, and I say it now the truth is none of them are superior. Those words are the language of our world. I used it because people think men are superior, so the question is, if you're talking right about superior already, in the world of superior, actually based on the Torah, women are probably superior. If you really want to know the truth, is they're neither, because they're both two servants of God, two halves of one whole. They're both necessary. It's like saying only makif, no pnimi, only the intimate energy without the expressive energy is not complete, and the expressive energy without the intimate energy is not complete. But who suffers more in this world? The woman suffers more. Because the woman, because she's more intimate and more vulnerable to an aggressive world. So what happens by Chet Eitzadas? What happens is that the feminine energy, which would have been appreciated had that sin not happened, is suddenly now subject to be very deeply hurt. Because who gets hurt most in a world like ours? The more internal people, not the external people. Because they are vulnerable. So here's an interesting twist. People use this all the time. It says in Bereshis there, after they ate from the tree of knowledge, so God so-called punishes, curses everyone. The truth is, in Torah there's no curse. It's really cause and effect. It's really cause and effect. It's like you put your hand in fire, you get burned. So what does it say there? It says that Adam, from now on, will have to bezeis apecha techelechem. He'll have to earn his living, eat bread by his sweat of his brow. We'll get back to that in a moment. What does it say by the Isha? That from now on she will go through birth pains, pregnancy pains and birth pains. And it says, V'hu yim shalbach. He will dominate over you. Right? So most people think that's good. That's actually a curse. It's not considered good. That's part of the problem, not part of the solution. The question that's asked is very simple. What kind of punishments are these? What does it have to do with eating from the tree of knowledge? Why suddenly, was it some type of God, like, eeny, meeny, miny, he just chose out of the hat You're going to work hard and you're going to have birth pain and be dominated. There has to be a connection to what happened here. And when you read the Chumash Pashtus, you don't really see what's the connection. Why this? Why not something else? But when you understand the deeper reason that I'm describing here, it's complete, makes sense. What would have happened had they not eaten from the tree of knowledge? So Adam and Chava would have been connected to their divine mission. Adam would be doing the job he has to do, and Chava would do her job. He wouldn't have to go work hard to earn his living. God would provide for him. What would he be doing? He'd be learning, doing mitzvahs, taking the world, L'avda l'shamra, taking Gan Eden, and turning it into a mishkan, turning it into a temple, turning it into a Messianic world. That's what he would be doing. But once you began to worship the material world, now you say it's important, so now you're going to sweat to earn your living. I'm not going to do it for you. Now you go out to the world and now you work hard, and you're going to work hard, and you can lose your identity. But the goal is to realize that the whole work is meant really to elevate it back to where it was meant to be. But now you're going to do it on your own. I'm not going to do it for you. Why by a woman was her thing about birth pain? Because if you thought that your life was to give your children, if you had been seamlessly connected to your purpose, then the purpose is to have children, bring them into this world, educate them, and so on. Once you have your own agenda, you're doing things on your own, now it's not going to be so easy. It's still the purpose is to have children, but now it's all going to come with a challenge. In a healthy world, you look, for example, animals, they give birth to children, they right away standing on their feet. There's no pain involved almost. That's how it would have been, because there'd be no so-called blockage. But when Adam and Chava both did the wrong thing, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, actually I didn't explain what they did wrong, so I think I have to explain that. Why is it called Eitz Hadas? What they did was that they suddenly sensed themselves as entities outside of God's plan. And once you're conscious of yourself, then you're already off track. Why was Adam and Chava before the sin of the tree of knowledge? Why were they not ashamed to be naked? Because they're like newborn children. Was they being ashamed of? Sexuality is part of their divine being, and that's it. Children are not ashamed, not because they're stupid, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. As soon as you become conscious of yourself, I'm an entity, and you recognize yourself, then suddenly your nakedness becomes a yizbeishashu. They were ashamed, so they covered themselves. And when God says to Adam, Ayeka, where are you? Because I don't recognize you anymore. You were once a soul in a body. You knew what your mission was. Now you've gone off. You have your own agenda. So now you're going to work hard. And a woman, you have your own agenda. Children are your purpose, but it's going to come with difficulty. So why hu yimshal bach? So the answer is also quite brilliant. The answer is because in this world, a woman without protection will be hurt. Because this world worships and values externals. Who's hurt most in a world of externals? The inner energy. So the man is given the job to protect, not to govern over, not to rule, to protect. But then it says that when Mashiach comes, and where we are now, it's called the feminine age, it says that the kevet teseviv gover, that the feminine energy will rise once again. And that's why it says, kel chasen v'kel kala, the last of the 7 brachas. Before that it only says kel chasen, because today a kel kala is not supposed to be heard, because it's intimate energy. But Mashiach comes, it says that the woman's power will rise again, because in Mashiach's time, this material world will no longer be the center of the universe. It'll be back, intimate energy will be a far more dominant energy than the masculine energy. And but until that time, you need to have so-called the mashpia, you need to have the masculine energy to protect the feminine energy. Unfortunately, what's happened in history is it's not protective. The masculine energy uses and abuses the feminine energy. That's the distortion. But the objective was that it should always be one of a protector until the time that the feminine energy can rise once again. Now again, I said a lot of things here very briefly, and I would recommend if you want more on this. I actually wrote it up in Torah Meaning for Life, in the chapter on women and men. I discussed this more at length. But the bottom line point is the following, that all these studies about girls and women is completely consistent with the Kabbalistic. It's amazing to me, actually, how consistent it is. Because it's all reflective on intimate energy, which is not respected in this world. Let's be honest, it's just simply not respected. If someone, the best proof of it is, you tell me, what sells in this world? That which has a better package or that which is a better product? Packaging, they spend a lot more money than on production. Now, once in a while, a good product is a good product. I'm not saying there aren't good products that get a good name. But packaging, you can, they say the cliche is don't judge a book by its cover. But everybody judges a book by its cover. I'm not sure why they say that. As a matter of fact, it's $1 billion industry to create covers for books and for packages. You ever buy these packages, big packages, and you come away with one little product inside, the whole package is this size. Because psychologically, people, the Madison Avenue cynics put it this way: people don't care what happened, they care what, it's not important what happened, it's important what people think happened. So it's the spin. If you spin it the right way. It's called in our language, alma de shikra. It's a false world. And if you package it right, you can sell anything. You can sell everything that's false. Who is hurt most in this? Feminine internal energy. That's how it is. That's why you'll see an unhealthy society, who's being hurt most in unhealthy societies? Women more than men. The truth is, men are also being hurt. But they can get away with this external, superficial, aggressive energy, power, and so on and so forth. That's why women and children are hurt most. Families are hurt most in a society that worships money and itself. Because we don't respect the real things. You respect the temporary, the immediate things. Look at our generation. What's the biggest crisis? New York City. Single life. The single life. Some people deify it, have turned it into a whole glorious thing, when in fact singles are miserable. I can tell you because I speak to enough of them. So we live, single life has become, to be single, you're like free. You're not bound, you don't have a husband or a wife to tell you what to do. You do whatever you want. So to speak, it sounds very beautiful. But at the end of the day, every human being needs love and needs intimacy. And I mean not just sexuality, I mean intimacy. I mean a warm, nurturing, consistent, trusting relationship. And look at our world today. On one hand, there's no progress like we have today has never been. Technology, economically, prosperity. There's never been so much wealth. I'm not saying we don't have our challenges, but compare this generation to 100 years ago. You can't, it's like ridiculous. It's not even in the same comparison. Look how much leisure we have, how much free time we have. So on one hand, the material world is very, very thriving, but the intimate world is suffering. People, like one guy told me, he runs a big hedge fund, he says, the higher the net worth, the more miserable they are. He says it's a rule, not some. The more wealthy, the wealthier, the more miserable they are. It's an interesting statistic. In other words, money has nothing to do with being happy. Even though everyone thinks, you give me money, I'll be happy. I'll be able to buy happiness. I'll be able to buy things that make me happy. It's a nice sugarcoating, and the Torah does not says Ashirus wealth is a blessing, so everyone should be blessed with this. You could say Amen if you like. But don't think that it's going to create happiness. Happiness has nothing to do with it at all. Like that story with the 17 children. So we live in a world which is very distorted. Masculine energy is very dominant. I mean, I say many women have now basically playing the game on men's terms, and they're using they've turned into masculine energy too, and that's considered a virtue. And who's being buried in the process? All our intimate energy. A man cries, it's seen like a man doesn't cry. But you think men don't need feminine energy? They also need feminine energy. That's why it said it overlaps. But that is not valued. And then all of us know, anyone who has children, anyone looks at a child, what is a child? A child is all about intimate energy. A child doesn't have anything to offer in the sense of like, I asked my granddaughter, I mentioned this a few months ago. I was there, she lives in California, my daughter. So my oldest granddaughter, I asked her, she's 6 years old. So I said, I want to give you a gift. I mean, it was a test. So of course she wants a gift. Everyone wants a gift. So I said, what's the gift? She says, what? So I said, I'm going to give you $1 billion. She literally turned her back on me and walked away. She didn't even blink. It means nothing to her. If I would tell her, I'll give you a coloring book or a doll or some Lego or whatever, she would have been so excited. And I said to myself, so who's more real, us or them? She didn't mean nothing to her. I don't even know if you could go and explain to her what $1 billion is. It could be 100 million too, frankly. So I realized what we think is valuable, true people don't think is valuable at all. They don't really care. If I said to her, I want to give you some love, I want to give you a hug and kiss, that's valuable. $1 million. And it's not like I said, it's not like she worked on herself and this means nothing. She's on a level of such spiritual level. It's initially doesn't mean anything. So you start thinking, so look at these two worlds. And I was thinking to myself, sadly, what day, the day will come, when will she begin to appreciate $1 billion? Is that going to be a great day or it's going to be a terrible day? To me, that's like the Chet Tzadas. That suddenly your whole world changes and that becomes valuable and everything else is secondary. So we all relate to this. As soon as you think about it, of course. And then you see people, lohut, people. I know a guy. He was. They found after he died, he lived in the Lower East Side. They found $1.2 billion in his bank account. Now he's single his whole life. He's the cheapest man on earth. Didn't even spend. There's cheap people cheap to others. There's some people cheap to themselves. And he basically held on to his money. Didn't give a penny to charity. Where does his $1.2 billion go? Straight to the government. Now you say to yourself, what is this man thinking? He's a Jewish man, he was observant and all that. You know very clearly, no one has yet mastered in 5,775 years the art of moving your money from this world to the next. We know how to move money offshore to Swiss banks. We know, all kinds of tricks. But nobody has figured out how to move it with you to the spiritual world. There are people who took the money into their graves. That didn't work. Nobody knows how to do that. And I don't think anyone's going to master that art. You agree? So, and everyone knows that and still some people will hold on to the last second as if like some miracle is going to happen and maybe I'll move on with it. Just to show you how crazy we worship the temporary world. And while we say it, even when we know it, we still worship it. That's how it's insane, but that's how it is. That's to show you, demonstrate how powerful this material world is and how non-valuable is the intimate world. Now, I'm not saying we don't get it. All of us have moments in our lives when you have a child, you have an event in your life, you have an awakening. Everybody has moments where you sense something bigger. But the question is, what dominates your life? What sustains you? So what the Torah, Chassidus, and Yiddishkeit do is they try to remind us of what really matters and try to make it into an actionable plan that you can hold on to all the time. And it becomes your reality. Expression in Hasidic texts goes like this, that when before the world was created, or let's put it in the higher worlds, it's elikus b'pshittus and elam is b'yischachus. I'll translate in a minute. And here it's elam is b'pshittus and elikus b'yischachus, which means in the true world, it's the divine that's real, and this world is a novelty. It's like something like a superimposed reality. And here it's the opposite. This world is real, and the divine is a novelty. It's like, oh, there's such a thing. Okay, interesting. Like they say the story between, there was a chassid and a Snag the Sharov had a debate talking about God. And they're debating God. So the Baal Nigla, the Litvak, he's finding all kinds of proofs in Torah. And the chassid just says, listen, I just believe in God. I don't need any proofs, and that's it. It's my reality. Obviously, debates like this, philosophical debates, don't go very far. So finally, the chassid says to the Rav, it says to him, you know what? I envy you. Because you think about God all day. I have to tell you, honestly, I think about myself all the time. So with that, they part ways. And this Rav thinks, he has another feather in his hat. The chassid gave him such a compliment that he thinks about himself and he thinks about God. He's going around telling everybody, this Gneisa Chassid said, I'm the one that thinks about God, and he thinks about himself. After a little while, I don't know if he came to it on his own or another Chassid reminded him, you don't understand, what he was telling you was actually an insult. It wasn't a compliment. Why? Because he was telling you the following. By the Chassid, by you think about God all the time because you know you exist. You don't have to think about yourself. That's a given. Your question is whether God exists. So you think about God. Does he exist? Does he not exist? How does he exist? By the chassid, it's the opposite. God is a reality. He doesn't have to think about it. His question is whether he exists. So he thinks about himself all the time. Do I exist? Don't I exist? Why do I exist? And so on. It's what the given is. What's a given and what's the chiddush? Or another way they say it is there was the same debate between the two. How would God destroy the universe if he wanted to destroy? So the Litvak is a Baal Nigla and a Baal Torah. So what he says, we open up our Torah and you say, first you bring a mabel, you bring a flood, you kill all the creatures. Then you bring a fire and you destroy everything else. And then you scatter all the ashes, al pi halacha, bittul chametz, bir chametz, es metzias, it's known as the sevaru, and everything is, according to halacha, it's all gone. The world is gone. So it takes some work, because you got to put it into first under water and then under fire, and then scatter the ashes and so on. If you knew a little science, you'd know that that wouldn't help. It just turned into gas. It still exists. It's just a different form. But that's another parsha. And the Chassid was asked the same question. He knew Tanya, Shayichud V'Amunah, the second part of Tanya. So he said, what would God do to destroy the universe? One thing only. He would do nothing. He would cease wanting it. He would cease breathing. He would cease speaking. As soon as he does nothing, it stops being. Now this isn't just semantics. It's a whole different way of looking at reality. What's real? Are we real and God is like we have to figure it out? Or is God real and we have to figure out why we're here? Now this takes work to come to a point like that, because this world, as the Arizal was Mechadish, the Tzimtzum Arishan, is a big black hole. God concealed himself very well, to the point he created an agnostic world, which explains also the Gemara there when it says, when Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses asked God, why does it say Nasa Adam? We shall create. The people will think that there's more than one God. So God's answer is very interesting. He doesn't say, you're right, I correct it. He says, those that want to make a mistake, let them make a mistake. What kind of statement is that? So God planted in the Torah a statement that people can make a mistake. If they want to make a mistake, they can make. So based on what the Arizal says, because God created an agnostic world, that you can deceive yourself into thinking that there's more, you can make mistakes. It's part of the plan. And you have to figure out that and not make the mistake. Even the great atheist who turned out to be Jewish, with a Jewish mother, Christopher Hitchens, they asked him, he was like one of these radical atheists. He died 2 years ago. They asked him, what happens if you come up above, before he died of cancer, what happens if you come up above and you find out there's a God? He said, I'm going to ask him why he concealed himself so well. It's a pretty chassidish answer for an atheist. Anyway, so bottom line is, in this world, intimate energy is hard to access. And the woman carries that in a way more than a man. This doesn't mean a man doesn't have it. It means this is her primary role. So at the end of the day, none of them are superior. But if you want to talk superior and inferior, I would be careful, because the studies and the Torah appears in that world that women have some qualities that men are far behind. And I say it as a man. I'm not embarrassed. I don't feel like a second-class citizen. Maybe like I wrote, maybe one of the reasons that men try to dominate is because unconsciously they're afraid that they're inferior, but that's another discussion. So let me conclude by saying the following. There's more to say on this topic. I hope I did justice to it. It's a very big topic, as you can imagine. But at the end of the day, both together, the partnership is two humble partners, and there's no reason for there to be a competition. When the world will recognize that, then we'll have what's called the Messianic age. The problem is, in a world of power and control, and everybody thinks I'm going to hold on to something and someone's taken away something from me, it's very hard to come to a state like that. So we're told that our job in this world is to come to realize and appreciate both these energies and how both need each other, and only together can they create the Tselem Elokim, the divine image. That's why only together can they give birth to a child. It's not just intimate energy, it's intimate plus expressive energy. So I don't care about this guy's statistics that it's only 1 billion of the DNA or whatever it is, because first of all, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And at the end of the day, God did create man and woman. It's not man-made creations. So there's no way to say that one is more important than the other. It's ridiculous to say that. And you'll see in any healthy life, when you see good marriages and you see good homes, you'll see it's a real partnership. Unfortunately, we all need help in that direction, because our priorities are sometimes distorted. Our homes did not always help, and our communities and societies contribute to a lot of the distortions of the roles. But if we can go back to so-called the Torah's original blueprint, template, I think we'd all be better off. So again, I hope I did justice to this. And again, the class is dedicated. Let me say the dedication at the end here. In memory of Ari ben Baruch Sarah, Yortzeit last Shabbos, Beinish Getzel ben David Eliyahu, Yortzeit last night, the 22nd of Shvat, and Kalman Mordechai ben David Eliyahu tonight. And Lahavdul Chaim, in honor of Yafa Rezel Bas Teva, 3rd birthday. So everyone should have a very masculine and feminine week, all joined as one. Those that have to find their soulmates, God should bless you to do that. both here and online, and those that already have found them, to learn to embrace and appreciate what the real, how you complement each other. Good night, everybody. Okay. Okay.